this video today, we're going to talk about some of the common problems that we see among buyers, sellers, and realtors in our general area of Florida. I'm a local real estate broker with a lot of agents writing a lot of contracts. So we come across situations every day of people that misunderstand some of the paperwork that they've signed. And as a result of that, once in a while, a deal falls apart. So we want to prevent that for the viewers of this video and anybody else that we can. We want happy sellers, happy buyers, and happy realtors. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like more of this type of content, because we're going to get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of the misunderstandings of when people are buying and selling. The first one that I want to cover is there's two different types of contracts that we commonly use here in Florida. One is approved by the Florida Association of Realtors and the Florida Bar, and we commonly call that in the industry the FAR Bar contract. This is the one nowadays that more sellers are wanting us to use because there's protections for both parties on the contract, both buyer and seller. The contract that we used to use back in the day, we'll call it, when the market wasn't so hot, was the as-is contract, which was an easy out for buyers, and here's why the sellers actually liked that. They didn't have enough money to do the necessary repairs on their homes. So they couldn't sign the FAR Bar and be held to the standard of the FAR Bar contract. They just wanted the buyer to pay what they're going to pay, buy it as is, and do their own repairs, or come back and renegotiate the price later. That one is less used today, and actually realtors are saying no as-is contracts accepted on this property because they want to make sure they're seeing multiple offers come in on homes, and they want to make sure when they accept that one offer that the buyer has to do certain things and doesn't have an easy out just because they changed their mind. So two contracts. The first area in both contracts that we see could be a misunderstanding is the deposit, because sometimes buyers are coming in from out of state and they don't have the deposit with them. So both of these contracts allow a certain amount of days for deposit or for additional deposit. Once the buyer and seller do sign the contract, however, and it is executed, then whether the money's there or not, it is a legal and binding contract. Please check with your attorney. I'm only a real estate broker, but it is a legal and binding contract at that time. So if the buyer decides within that time period that they don't want to send the deposit because they've changed their mind, they technically are still bound to put in that deposit. So the seller does have recourse if the buyer defaults on the contract by not sending in the deposit. That one's pretty plain and simple, easy to understand. The money's still due even if the buyer has changed their mind. So there's usually a place on the front of the contract, on both contracts, that tells them where to submit the money to. So that's the first issue that we have, is people think sometimes there's a 3-day right of rescission on a resale single-family home, and there's not in the state of Florida. There might be in other states. I only know the state of Florida. So in the state of Florida, if you're coming from out of state and you're purchasing a home and you sign a contract and the seller signs the contract and accepts your offer, then it is a contract. There's no 3-day right of rescission unless it's a condo or something specific, or perhaps a builder has a different contract that they're using for their community. But right now, resale home, single seller, single buyer, no right of rescission. It's not like a retail contract. It's a real estate contract. The second area that we want to talk about is the inspections in the inspection period. And on an as-is contract, it clearly states that the buyer can have any and all inspections done within a certain time frame. If that time frame is left blank, it's 15 days. If not, it'll be whatever day it says on the contract. And those are calendar days, by the way. So the buyer can have any and all inspections done, back out of the contract if they don't like what they found. Or maybe go back and renegotiate with the seller for a lesser price. Not likely the sellers are going to be too negotiable in this market. And a lot of them are not accepting as-is contracts at this time anyway. So let's go to the Florida Bar, which is a bit more complicated, but it does allow the seller to make necessary repairs. The biggest area that we have right now that's a bone of contention is the roofs on existing homes in Florida. Now, if a buyer is looking at a home that's between 15 to 20 years old or older and it hasn't had a roof replacement, I would say think about that when you're making your offer to a buyer, whether they're going to be willing to accept the roof or not, in the price of the home. So it could be that the roof is going to need replaced sometime in early years after closing. The seller does, however, on the home inspection have a right to make necessary repairs to the roof without necessarily replacing the roof, which may not make a buyer happy. Same thing with an air conditioning system. It might be an older air conditioning system, and we know these are the two biggest expenses a buyer is usually going to incur after purchasing the home. The contract basically states that it has to be in normal working order. It might not look as pretty as a new one, but it has to be normally functioning. All mechanical items have to be normally functioning in the home. So then we get over to where the buyer's getting insurance on the home, and the insurance company is going to say, well, you might need to replace that hot water heater. If it was in normal working order when you purchased the home, the seller doesn't have that obligation under normal circumstances, nor does he have the obligation to replace the roof. So if the buyer wants out because they think that's going to happen, that they're going to have to replace it after closing at some point, it doesn't allow the buyer necessarily to get out of the contract. If there's visible leaks or damage to the roof, ceiling, fascia, soffitting, and walls, then the seller has the responsibility to repair that up into the confines of the repair clause in the contract. Now, the repair clause says automatically 1.5% on items to be repaired, including general repairs. That's all general repairs. And another 1.5% on wood destroying organisms. That's termites in Florida. So termites or wood decay can be either. So those are the confines of the contract, unless the seller and buyer agree to change that amount of money to a flat fee, maybe $1,000 or $500. So it doesn't automatically let the buyer out of the contract if they don't like the results of the inspection they get. It's not an automatic. Just be aware of that on a FAR bar. So consider the house. If a buyer is purchasing a home, they need to look at the age and condition as they can see it when they walk through the home. There may be things that the buyer can't see when they walk through the home. So most counties in Florida have a permit area that you can search. Permits if a roof has been replaced, permits if an AC has been replaced, but a lot of times the realtor will actually mention it in the remarks. So this is another area. If you're looking at a 15 to 20 year old home or older, you might want to look at what has already been replaced, what major repairs and improvement has been done, and if not, consider that in the offering price, right? So make an educated decision on what a buyer is going to offer for a home. That would be my recommendation. And educated knowing that perhaps the roof is on its last legs or perhaps the AC is on its last legs, because those are the two most common costly repairs on a home. So that's the number 2 thing I would look for in the contract. The third thing that is a big thing, and believe me, I am not covering all the confines of these contracts today, just the overview and the most common areas that we see miscommunication or misunderstanding happening. The third one is a final walkthrough. Some people choose not to do that. We would highly recommend that you do a final walkthrough because you want to make sure that the home is in the condition that you actually purchased it, right? Or a buyer wants to make sure that the home is in the actual same condition that they purchased it in. The landscaping has been maintained, the home hasn't been damaged with move out, and those types of things. Those types of things can usually be handled by a simple form at closing that the seller agrees to go ahead and make that small repair or fix this or fix that or give a monetary discount at closing to cover the fact that they didn't have the yard landscaped properly before closing and it had overgrown. So a final walkthrough would be something that we do highly recommend. So by all means, a buyer or seller is free to consult an attorney on a sales contract. I know it's hard right now because we are in such a seller's market So I would say be as prepared as possible by knowing as much about a home before a buyer would put a contract in on a home. So having the realtor ask questions of the listing agent or the seller is recommended, so the buyer makes sure they're making the right offer on a home. We see happy sellers and buyers as a whole every day. Most of them are very happy with their purchases and sales. We just want to help any potential buyer or seller avoid unknown circumstances up front. We don't like to see buyers lose deposits. We don't like to see sellers lose buyers. And we want to see people know all the facts, as many of the facts as possible, to make an educated decision on buying a home today in Florida. And lots of people are doing that. So please join us and buy a home in Florida. Let us help you through that process. Again, I'm Nancy Deichman. I'm a local real estate broker. Please comment below. By the way, I have a video up here to your left about how to send in that escrow deposit, so to make sure that it reaches the escrow company. Take care. Thank you for listening.